All right, so now let's see, step 3, we're going to check all the options. And this is kind of a cool thing. I think a lot of our maybe people that I talk to don't realize what this is and how they can use it. So maybe, let's look at a couple of more interesting options, and the idea that you can sort of change how the code gets generated, and you can sort of get an idea in advance of what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so the green check marks, it's a theme kind of throughout the VBUC, and in this case, it's telling us, hey, you want to check this out. You want to go and make sure that the options you've selected really are what you want. So you can go a little bit deeper. You've got a drop down, but for people unfamiliar with the VBUC and these options, it does not tell you enough. So if you click on View, what it'll do is show us some additional information here.
Whoa, so what's all this then?
Yeah, so these 5 options here under features here, these options were the ones, if I go back, these were the ones that were here in the.
Right. So these are all your database options.
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we've only got ADODB and DAO. We don't have Oracle and Proc and RDO and other stuff. So those are there, but because there's no green check mark, it's not being used in the project.
That's right. But at the same time, if you are certain that your application does use one of these and they're not being checked off, it could be that you're using a version we've never come across before. So make sure to let us know. But in general, yeah, we'll pick up on all the things we're familiar with and have support for. And that's why they're here. It's because we have some degree of support, or at some point, we needed to add that option. So we can jump into ADODB. And so we have 3 options here, and it's important to remember that this application uses Access. Okay. So that kind of means, hey, we can't use SQL Client because that's for SQL Server. It wouldn't work. COM interop just really isn't where we want to go, right? Because that leaves us in the COM world. So we choose instead system.data.common that supports lots of different databases, including Access. So it's really the way to go unless you have SQL Server here. SQL Client. So we'll leave this. Something else to note, because we'll see this in some of the other options. You'll see down here these mappings. So for instance, ADODB record set maps to one of our helper classes. Mm-hmm. And you can see, and that's really in this list, it's one of the few that are part of the core ADODB classes that are mapped to a record set helper. And we have some enum values further down that are mapped like these things that have their mappings to some of our helper classes. But in terms of the principal classes of ADODB, they're all mapped to their equivalents in system.data. So with the exception of the helper class.
And what's all this over on the right here, Robert?
Sample code, right? Mm-hmm. So the top, VB6, right, as it says. Mm-hmm. And if you've chosen this first option, this is what it would look like in VB.NET. Otherwise, it would look like the bottommost window here on the right for C#. And as you change the options, you'll see that the sample code will change as well. So for SQL Client now, you'll notice that
no more record set syntax in C#.
Exactly. Yeah. The main
difference. That's kind of cool, right? I mean, you've got that syntax through the helper classes, so maybe it just eases that transition from VB to C# for people.
Sure, and in some cases, actually, the record set helper class is a very useful container for some apps. It's actually the way to go. It's what makes the most sense to maintain the intentional. The record set itself might have been really the only option, a decade or so ago. But in some cases, the record set helper actually is a fantastic solution to some apps that actually require, especially for detached record sets. It actually makes sense. So yeah, but for other customers, it's a step along the way to getting to really what they want to see in ADO.NET. So if we back out from this first ADODB, we look at DAO as well. So it's important that we check all of these, of course, right? Mm-hmm. So again, we're kind of faced here with COM interop. No, we don't want that, or to ADO.NET. But again, using the helper classes for system.data.common, and you can see the mappings further below. Again, the main classes, with the exception of the record set helper, because nothing like that exists in .NET. So, and again, we've got the sample source code on the right. So we're going to leave this option. This looks good. And let's go to the grids.
Mhm.
So if we look here, you can see in the dropdown, there are a couple of options available, right? We've got 3. Well, let's take a closer look. So COM interop, again, so I'm surprised you haven't asked me yet, John. Why would people want to migrate to COM interop? And so the answer is maybe they don't want to change the kind of the API for the existing component, and they want to do it themselves. So the VBOC will leave the original MS Data Grid library component kind of in there, but COM interop. And will it work? Well, some things work via COM interop, but either way, the point is not to make much change at all, so that maybe they go in and make changes as opposed to using the VBOC to migrate, for instance, in this case, to component 1's true DB grid, when in fact that might not be the target that the customer wants at all. So COM interop kind of does less code shuffling, if you will. But in our case, what we want to do is, I'm chuckling, John, because I don't recall which direction we want to go in, but let's try using the data grid view. So this is Microsoft's data grid view. I believe what we saw, if we saw any grids in what we were just looking at from that application, that intake app, that it should be simple enough that the data grid view would be a good candidate for us. But if we need to come back,
yeah, and of course, if you want to use component 1, you have to have a license for component 1.
Yes, or a trial that hasn't expired. Yeah.
Well, yeah, to try it out. But I mean, if you wanted to use it as an ongoing basis, you have. It's not like it's part of .NET that you can just, if you have Visual Studio, you can get in .NET Framework, you're going to get that, right?
That's right. That's right. That's a really good point. Some customers come to us and they'll purchase the VBUC, and we try to make it perfectly clear. But after getting the license and migrating, they're like, well, what do you mean we need to buy another license? And it's like, well, none of these third-party component options in here are things that we actually include with the license for the VBUC. That's between you and the.
Yeah.
So we'll leave this option here.
Mm-hmm.
Go back. And you can see we got another grid in there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's check out the options that are available. So here again, we have another component 1. Component as an option, grid, right? A little bit different. And then we have this mobilize.NET helper. So what's the helper in this case? And so some of the .NET equivalents, and I think I might be stretching the term a little bit, but equivalents to their VB6 counterparts, like the data grid view, it's a little bit more lightweight than what was available in VB6. So we had to create a helper class that encapsulates the functionality of the data grid view and extends it to add back some of the features, or I should say some of the features that are just simply not included in what is a lightweight grid component, the data grid view. And so we've done that. There's no extra licensing required. And in fact, the code, all of the helper class code is available. I mean, you can see it and check it out and maybe even extend it beyond what we've done to support your application. So we're going to choose this one as well.
Those 2 do's down there mean that you're going to have some work if you're using FlexGrid lib appearance settings, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in many cases, a lot of these, a lot of folks don't really customize or play around with the properties in VB6 that much. So many of these can be ignored because the default properties of the data grid view will be sufficient.
Yeah, it looks like the ones that are really common, we've got mappings for, but things like text style settings, well, if you really need to do that in a grid control, have at it. You just have to go in and set those properties in .NET then.
Yeah, exactly. But first, check out if the default properties are good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So we're done with the grids group here, category. If we take a look at the common control library, the options here, COM interop or migrate to .NET, to the Windows Forms equivalents. And seems like a no-brainer, right, Joe?
Yeah, no kidding.
So you can see, what was in this particular, because there's several common control library versions, right? So, but in this particular one, we have status bar through to progress bar, and fortunately, they all have equivalents. So
yeah,
for us to do
the names changed a little bit. Like they don't call them status bars or tab strips anymore. They call them status strips and tab controls. Just seems kind of random to me, but that's what happened with .NET was they just came up with different names for things, and they didn't really feel like they had to have continuity from VB. They had a lot of other things going on besides VB6 in the world when they built .NET.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So first time I ever noticed status bar, and status strip. Maybe they should just call it status strip bar. I don't know. You might want to. Let's go back to features here.
I'm not going there, Robert, with the strip bar.
So we've got the common dialog control. So this is one of my favorite problems or challenges, I guess. One of them with migrating over is in VB6, of course, you've got the common dialog control, which takes on kind of properties to make it what it becomes. Whereas in .NET, you have individual components, right? Individual common dialog flavors, if you will, but they're separate actual classes. And so one of the things that the VBC tries to figure out is, hey, is it, for the printer, is it an open save? Is it a color or a font dialog? So those sometimes require a little bit of work if it's, and in fact, some folks in VB6 reuse their common dialog to do multiple, versions of this and as a result, it causes a little bit of, the VBUC has to do a couple of extra, steps. And so it's definitely, it may or may not work right out of the box depending on how your VB6 was coded. But obviously here, the best and really for me, the only option is to migrate to the .NET equivalent or equivalents.
And to be clear, since we're kind of talking about that right now,
sure.
The VBUC is only going to migrate to Windows Forms. It's not going to migrate to WPF. It can't really do anything else. So the runtime library and the control library is all going to be based on Windows Forms.
Right. I mean, what else would you want aside from then maybe migrating to the web, right?
Right. So. Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's a different video we'll have to do. We'll have to use WebMap and take something to the web, which is a very cool, I think, super cool technology, but not what we're talking about today.
Right. Mm-hmm. So are you saying there's no option for us to migrate to COBOL from this?
Oh, well, I'm going to talk to the product team and see if I can get them to work on that, VB to COBOL. Maybe VB to 360 assembly. How does that sound?
All right. So here for the mask edit control, we also have, these mappings.
Yeah.
Kind of a no-brainer. And as long as these are all selected to .NET component, then we're fine. So as we scroll down, we have kind of an others bucket. Nothing there is checked off. And this changes from version to version in the VBUC. And what we try to do is make sure that we can add options that are complete enough, right? So if we have a component, in fact, yeah, there's no more here with check marks. So we'll talk about the code conversion group, but before I do that, let me just say that, we have support for other components, but they may not be complete enough. So we may have done support for, component X, but a particular customer implements it in a certain way, and we don't find that it offers enough coverage to actually publish it in the VBUC. So we'll leave them out. But just because they're not listed here doesn't mean we can't get you support. So.
Yeah,
okay.
It's important for people to remember that an enormous third-party ecosystem sprung up around creating these OCXs for the VB6. I don't know if you remember when you got the VB6 box, there was this huge little book in the back that was all of the third-party vendors, all the add-ons, all the tools, everything that people made that would, not Microsoft people, but, other companies that made that would work with VB6. And so, not only that, but of course, if you want, you can write your own OCX. So you could create a DLL or an OCX. And, of course, we can't convert that because we've never seen it before, right? So, but you can always use commenter opt if you really need to, right?
Yep. And if your application's large enough, it might be cost effective for us to create a customized mapping for you.
Yeah, good point. I mean, we could always extend this tool for you for exactly what you need. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly. And we do that a lot.
Whoever you are. What's that? We do that all the time, right?
I said we do that a lot, for projects we do for our customers internally.
Yeah.
Okay, so code conversion. This is a slightly different beast of a category, if you will. I'm going to actually, if you notice up here, there are options for those different categories, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to click over code conversion so we can take a look at the whole group. Okay, so here are these items here. So it's kind of important to read through this. If there's any one part of the VBUC, I would say that people come back to the most and make changes to, and then rerun the migration, it's under code conversion. And so you can see here, so there's options here to make the .NET assemblies visible, and dealing with ActiveX EXEs. There's some options, and there's some code samples here to take a look at. You know, there's lighter, or I should say less important things like, you know, commenting out dead code that we find, whether or not we generate auto properties, and now something a little bit more important regarding default property resolution. So whether or not we use a reflection helper class to figure out exactly what that default property is. And default properties are really fun. I mean, I feel like with every new technology, something that was thought to be easy, right? So in VB6, you can use a default property. So basically never say like .text. In this case, I think, yeah, this is the text box. So you don't actually have to say .text to imply the value of the text box. You just put the text box name itself, the object name, and then the default property, of course, is text. And so in .NET, you know, it's like, whoa, this isn't a feature anymore. You know, this is a problem. And so we've created a helper class. So down here you can see reflection helper, right? Get primitive value and to try to figure that out. I would say in the case of this particular option, to leave static code analysis on for your first run, right? I mean, we're gonna hopefully only have to run this once, but and the reason is you don't want to over apply the helper classes, and it's a very easy thing to do. They're there to help, but too much help can sometimes, well, not be helpful. So the next option. Error handling. Well, I mean, it's true. You don't want to be calling a helper class unless you really need it. So, because in a lot of cases, you can make the changes manually. So.
Yeah.
So, but let me say though, if you have no experience in .NET, and you know, then maybe you should try more of the helper classes, because you might get the application to compile quicker. So it's.
Well, yeah. I mean, the goal, right, is you've got a working application at VB6, and you want it to be a working application at .NET. You don't necessarily want to create a theoretically perfect block of code, you know. Now, you know, so even if you use reflection helper, or you use a helper class or whatever, you know, the code may look a little cluttered, but if it works, right, you know, and then maybe at some point you're going to go and do some refactoring. You have to go and make a change to that block, that subroutine, that method that it's now in. Maybe that's a good time to go ahead and do some things that are a little more modern, instead of just using default properties, you know, but actually make it a little more readable for the next dude, and, you know, actually say that it's like the text property or something like that, right?
Exactly. And in fact, this error handling one is a good example of that. So, you know, if you're migrating to VB.NET, and I personally don't recommend it. A lot of reasons, good enough for another video to talk about that. But it's easier to leave the on error statements than it is to remove them and put try catches. So, you know, in .NET, you can, a simple try catch, I mean, you can catch any number of different exception types and really have some really robust exception handling. But what we're doing here is, you know, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's try catch. You know, we found an on error go to, we found the handler. So the VBC can add them. When it gets to be, you know, have multiple levels of go-tos, and you get a little bit more complicated in the exception handling in VB6, it'll require a little bit more manual work, a little bit more cleanup because of the clutter actually in VB6 in this case. So the try-catch to lambdas is another good option. For those that aren't familiar with them, take a look. But again, that does add a little bit of extra code there, but it might be appropriate. So. And one of the funny things about VB6 and on error resume, sorry, I just got to say this really fast, for me, is how sometimes a customer has on error resume next, and how you're not actually trapping for errors. I mean, the error's there and it can be trapped later or whatever, but essentially, you know, if you run into an error, the code is supposed to continue on regardless, and that can actually become an issue when you're doing try catches, and that's where try catch with lambdas can come in and actually save the day. So. It all depends on how you wrote it in VB6. So form load, you know, VB6 and .NET don't do form load in terms of the events, the firing of the events, the order in which they do them. They don't do them the same. And some applications try to do stuff before the form is displayed. So we've given options here to users to be able to kind of figure out what the best replacement is to kind of, you know, match up the mismatch a little bit between VB6 and .NET and the way form load works. So this is a spot that a lot of folks will come back and make a change to when re-migrating their code. I've seen that a lot. So free COM objects. So if you're moving your application completely over to .NET and you're going to have, all managed all of your third-party components will be other managed assemblies, then there's nothing really to worry about. But if part of your app's going to stay in VB6, or you're still going to continue using third-party components, maybe components you've written, and especially if you're aware of any memory leaks. So garbage collection is a little bit different, right, between the technologies, and sometimes we find, not with apps that we migrate, but the issue originates with the original application, actually. And if that memory leak, or the propensity for there to be one when partially migrating over and keeping unmanaged objects in the application, this actually can help out quite a bit. But in general, I would recommend not using it until you know you have a memory leak issue.
Mm-hmm.
Late binding, all sorts of different options here. So if you have any late bound objects, generally the best option, the latest one that we've added actually, is a static code analysis with helper classes and dynamic variables. Some folks don't like to use dynamic variables. I mean, it's a throwback to some aspects of VB6, but it's in .NET, so it's all good. Anyhow, take a look here, and of course read all this. I'm not going to belabor the point, but that's definitely an important one. Line and shape. So we have a helper class that mimics lines and some shapes. The better option is to use our helper classes where the power pack is not available, but some folks aren't crazy about the power pack, maybe because it has the word Visual Basic in it. I don't know. And there hasn't been a new one in a while, so maybe there's fear of deprecation at some point. But either way, it's actually a really good option if you've got a lot of lines going on there and you don't want to re-architect, all of your shapes.
Right.
So mid, left, right, string functions. Migrate to the native version. Do it the way the big boys do. But
even if it's harder.
Even if it's harder, and sometimes it's a lot harder. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of easiness, ease of use with the VB6 built-in string functions, but Microsoft does have a compatibility class so that maintains a lot of those. But just bite the bullet, go native. That sounded a little bit different than I thought it would, but skeletons generation. So this is a really good option for folks that have multiple VB6 projects with interdependencies between them. So when you migrate the application, John, right, you can imagine you've now got all of this .NET code, and you can only work on one. Let's say you've tried to compile it, and all of your projects have compilation errors. Where do you start? Well, you pick something, right? And you realize it has other dependencies, and those dependencies aren't compiling, so you certainly can't add them. But with skeletons generation here, what it actually does is create everything empty. You should be able to compile it, no problem. And the projects, the internal projects, no problem. And then when you're working on the individual projects in .NET, trying to get them to compile, their dependencies will already be there and available. Sure, they don't work, but you can get the application. The interfaces aren't going to change, and you can get them to compile. And especially if you're divvying up the work amongst other developers, this is a really good option. But if that's not the case, you can skip right over it. Stubs generation, something we'll probably see when we migrate this. So you've got, so by the way, cut, there we go. Am I spending too much time on these options?
No, I think it's actually useful. We might, what I was thinking a moment ago is I was realizing how much detail you were giving here, not in a negative way, but I was thinking, gee, this is so good. Maybe we should use this in its own little video, just on, hey, here's more stuff about the tool, right? Because we're not off the track of the migration, but we're off on things that the migration doesn't really use. Whereas before we were talking about, we're going to use ADO.NET and stuff like that. So I just keep going because we'll see what it looks like when we get it all put together, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Action.
Okay. Oh, wait. Before we do action, I just want to let you know, my agent said that if we do break this into 2 videos, I need merchandising rights. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll have my people call your people.
Okay. I'll back up a little bit. And so here we've got stubs generation. And so this is interesting. We'll probably see this when we migrate the app. So the idea is you've got certain functions, and I'm going to highlight one here. Well, up here you can see left B. And so the VBC sees that and says, oh, well, it's nothing, there's nothing really available in .NET for that. I mean, there's some different things we could do, really depending on what the original intention of the VB6 programmer was. And so what it does, and again, this is the upgrade stubs versus upgrade note option. So it will create a separate project, and it'll place all of these. And of course, this assumes, and in most cases, it's because the VBC recognizes that these can become static functions, so they can be called without instantiating an object, fortunately, right? So they throw them, the VBC puts them all in a project where they all are, which means that wherever this left B function is in your migrated code, you're not going to have compilation errors right there, right? And so if you want to try to figure out, okay, well, first of all, do I want to continue using something like left B? If I'm not sure what the solution would be, I can play around with it in that other project, in the upgrade stubs project, so as to figure out how do I solve this, as opposed to compiling your app. There's no solution. There's just a note, and then you want to see if what you think would be a good replacement in .NET. You got to do it everywhere that it's called. So in this case, you can do it in a single spot. I think it'd be very helpful. And generally, I actually like leaving that there. But in this case, it's not a very large object. Excuse me. It's not a very large project. So upgrade note, and you can see here, it just puts the note in here saying, hey, you're probably going to run into some problems. We don't know how to upgrade it. So there's a link, right, to go to kind of some support pages that may provide you with some general or some very specific. Excuse me. I'm going to cut. There's a support page. You can see the link here to provide you with more information on how to resolve the issue. So, okay, almost done with these. So unused local variables, if they're unused, Visual Studio for .NET is going to tell you, and you probably don't want them. We can comment them out as well. So. And then VB collection, there's two options here. The system.collections.specialized order dictionary class. That's the one we recommend, and we migrate to that. I think that by default is what's selected. And then the other one is to use the Microsoft Visual Basic collection. So again, another kind of support class that's was made available in Microsoft. So, but we're going to go with the most .NET and the least VB.
Mm-hmm.
So once we're done here, right, we want to save these options. I certainly don't want to go through this and make decisions again. I'm kidding. This was actually pretty straightforward. So let me just back up a level and just say that these were for the demo options. And great. And so now they're saved if we ever need to go back and reload them up. So let's go back to the options and click confirm options. And notice now we've got 3 green check marks.
Mm-hmm.
John, what do we do now?
Well, let's see. How long have we been recording? Any idea?